Welcome back to Forbidden Knowledge News. I'm your host, Chris Matthew. Today my guest is Dr. Gregory Little. Before we bring him on, a couple of announcements. First, I want to thank everyone that has helped, supported, and followed us over the past 6 years. You guys are absolutely amazing. Without all of you, we wouldn't be here. This summer, we're going to be filming a documentary, and we need your help. We're going to be traveling the country, interviewing your favorite, my favorite authors, researchers, contactees, fellow podcasters, and possibly even you. This is a big project, and if you would like to help, we have links there you can use, supportfkn.com or a PayPal link if you'd like to leave a donation. We're going to be covering all the topics I talk about here every day. You're definitely going to enjoy what we have planned, and we want to be able to come out to as many states as possible and talk with as many of you as possible, and even possibly have you be a part of this. Now, if you'd like to get involved with the production, email me, forbiddenknowledgenews@gmail.com. Also, if you make a donation of any amount through supportfkn.com, you also get access to select chapters from Cory Hughes' upcoming book about the JFK assassination. Like I said, this is a huge project, and we know you guys are really going to enjoy it, and we would like you to be a part of it. So email me, forbiddenknowledgenews@gmail.com, or go to supportfkn.com. Forbidden Knowledge News is always available on Rokfin, Minds, Odysee, Rumble, and all podcast platforms. We don't count on being on YouTube much longer. We're just waiting for the day we go check on our account and it's not there. We have so many other options for you to get all of our content, like Rokfin. Rokfin's where you get our premium content and all the premium content from every creator on Rokfin. Just go to rokfin.com/FKN+, or click the link there in the description. Our website is forbiddenknowledge.news. It's the home of the Forbidden Knowledge Network. We feature some awesome podcasts on there. And finally, be sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. All those links are right there in the description. And guys, please check out Karen Holton, healthcoach.com. She has these awesome orgone generators. They're the best quality orgone in existence. Go check it out. And if you order, you're going to get 10% off by using the coupon code KNOWLEDGE10. Today, I want to welcome back to the show Dr. Gregory Little. He is a researcher and author of over 30 books. His research has been featured on the National Geographic Channel, MSNBC, Discovery, and the History Channel. Dr. Little, welcome back. How you doing?
I'm doing good. Thank you for having me back, Chris. And we'll see where this goes. I guess we're going to talk about the new book. In fact, today, the day we're recording, is the release of the ebook version of Origins of the Gods. The audio version came out about a month ago, and this is the paper version, but it's not being released until May the 10th. And it has to do with supply side stuff. But anyway,
Right, yeah.
The audio and ebooks are available, every version of both.
Well, perfect. Yeah, this is a perfect time. It's going to be an epic discussion about, like you said, your new book, Origins of the Gods. Just the title alone, Qesem Cave, Skinwalkers, and Contacts with Transdimensional Intelligences, I'm already in. But the book explores the not only role played by shamanism and communication with higher intelligences, but the role it played in the development of ancient civilizations and even possibilities of our ancestors using shamanic rituals at sacred sites to create portals for communication with whatever these entities are. So this is going to be fascinating, like I said. Let's start with what brought you to write this particular book.
Well, I wrote approximately half of it along with Andrew Collins. He wrote the other half. Andrew Collins appears on the show Ancient Aliens real often, almost every episode he's on. And Andrew is doing a lot of appearances on that new show with William Shatner. I can't remember the title of the show right now. The Unexplained is what it is. And Andrew and I did an earlier book a couple years ago called Denisovan Origins, and both of us have an interest in ancient aliens, shamanism. My interest is primarily in the Native American side, both North and South America and Central America too. Andrew knows a great deal about the entire rest of the world. That is not my expertise. But we both came to the same conclusions many years ago, many years ago. We both started writing at the same time in the early 1980s. And like I say, we came to the same conclusions, and we have become friends. We've been friends for 20 some years now, and just decided to do this together. And there's new evidence. Our theory that we had about what really is the origin of the ancient gods, be it ancient aliens coming here or be it just complete nonsense, which is what skeptics say. And I'd like to talk a bit about what skeptics say about it later, but we just decided it was time to do this because there's new evidence that really supports what our fundamental belief about it is.
Excellent. So I think a good place to start would be, how far back do you believe that our ancestors were using shamanic rituals or discovering these, the ability to use these rituals to connect with other dimensional entities?
Well, that is what that Qesem cave is about. That is a cave in Israel, not too far from Tel Aviv. It was only discovered a few years ago. And archaeologists, Israeli archaeologists, started working in that cave and started pulling out more and more evidence of occupation. And really at the very bottom of the evidence, as they kept excavating down layer after layer after layer, what they found were objects that they know for certain were used in rituals. One of those objects, which they found several of, is a wing from a swan. Swans were used in a lot of shamanic rituals. They still are in some places. It's a very big deal in Native American culture. And that level goes back in that cave to about 400,000 BC, 400,000 years. Now, we humans, our first ancestors supposedly were about 2 million years ago or 1.8 million years ago, but they weren't us. They weren't Homo sapiens sapiens. And we've gone through a long evolutionary process. So this actually predates what most people consider to be the beginning of Homo sapiens sapiens, which is us. So it goes back at least 400,000 years, probably a lot further. I'm not sure that you would find too much evidence of rituals going back millions of years ago, because it just wouldn't exist anymore. The bone wouldn't exist, nothing else would. So at least 400,000 years, and that was Andrew. That's where Andrew started his half of the book. The first half of the book I led up to that, and I really talked about how Native American shaman were doing rituals and what they were trying to do with the rituals and what happened during the rituals. And then at the end of my half, basically I said, and this search for the gods, this contact with the gods has been going on a lot longer than anybody has ever thought. And so that leads into the 400 and some thousand years ago where Andrew picks up with the Qesem cave. So that's actually astonishing when you think about it. 400,000 years ago.
It is
in Israel. Yeah,
it's extremely astonishing, and I want to go back to where you started with the native indigenous cultures and exploring their stories. Based on what you learned, what do you think was involved in some of these earliest shamanic practices?
Well, what they were doing was attuning themselves and harmonizing to the spiritual world. I'll put it that way. Although, according to Native American beliefs, everything is part of the spiritual world. And their beliefs, and what I've done is try to go to the earliest known beliefs that is in the ethnographic literature. And ethnography really began, Native American ethnography began around in the late 1600s, when mainly it was the black robes or priests started coming in And they would talk to the Native American shaman, and then they'd write down what they said. And then later, real ethnographers, professionals came in and became inculcated in with that culture. And then they tried to learn and pick up everything that was believed. Now, Native Americans hid most of their primary beliefs from these people. But over the years, these beliefs have trickled out, and we pretty much know what they believed about the beginning of everything, which really comes from the Cheyenne tribe and what is known as the Massum ceremony. That is spelled Massum. And the Massum ceremony was a way for the tribe to link with whatever the top spiritual power was, which they had a name for it, Maheo, which is their word for God. And in the course of communicating with this top spiritual power, they had to first go through a series of rituals to go through lower spiritual forces. And those lower spiritual forces would be considered tricksters, entities that they called the Mayan, which are a lot like the jinn, and then angels. There's a level above it. So their rituals actually took them through these levels until they got to the top level. The ceremony began with a signal from the sky. Literally, it was a star. It was a very specific star. The sighting of the star with the Cheyenne culture was done from the bighorn medicine wheel, and the shaman would be there. And early in the morning, they would look down a rock line at the bighorn medicine wheel, which is a gigantic wheel-like structure made from piled stones. It's above the timberline. It's like 10,000 feet high, and you have an incredible view of the horizon. So they would go up there in the night. They would lay in a central cairn, which is like a central pile of rocks that you could lay down in and look up and down these wheels. So they would see a specific star rise, and that was the beginning of the Massum ceremony. It was almost always around June 21st, the middle of the summer. And that began the ceremony. They would make a central area in the encampment that they built. They would have one opening in the central area. They'd put like a circular earthwork around with one opening. That opening was oriented toward a specific mountain. The mountain was Bear Butte for them. And that allowed the Mayan to come in. But they removed all the sod from the ground. And then they would have bare feet, and they literally grounded themselves in the dirt. Now, that is really important in a lot of these cultures. You have to ground yourself. And so there's something very scientific going on there. The Earth has an electromagnetic resonance. It's called the Schumann resonance. And there's actually 3 Schumann resonances, but the primary one it's a level of hertz. There's no use even talking about the numbers, but basically, it is the hertz level is the same right between our alpha and beta, right at the time when we start really relaxing, kind of meditating, not quite going to sleep. And that is the Earth's ambient resonance. And we actually evolved in that resonance. So what they did was to ground themselves in that by putting their bare feet in the ground. And then they went through these complicated ceremonies. The first ceremony they did, only a few very important people witnessed it. And it was to reenact creation. And that, to me, this reenacting of creation, to me, is it's fascinating because it explains their entire belief system. They said that before there was anything, this is mound builder belief, and this is also like the Cheyenne, the Zuni believe the same thing. So do the Hopi, and that is there was a singularity. That word is actually used in the early ethnography books, a singularity. That's what they said existed. And this singularity was spirit, pure spiritual energy. And at some point, for reasons that we do not and cannot understand, the singularity developed into 2 parts, kind of like a yin and a yang symbol. You know, you have a yin and a yang, and they kind of rotate. But that's a contradiction in terms. You can't have a singularity in 2 parts. So the moment that it created these two parts, or it broke into these two forces. It split and it created an upper world, a lower world, and a middle world. The middle world is really the physical universe. So let's just talk about the earth, since that's where we're living. That's where they were living on. So the middle world is the physical earth. The upper world is represented by big raptor birds. The sun is part of it. The moon is part of it, but the moon also traverses down into the lower world too. The sun just simply comes up every day. It's not a god. The sun is a power. The god, to them, Maheo, is what's on the other side of the sun. It's the power behind it. So this upper world has a power, and it's one of the two great powers. And that power is the power of creation. Creation is the upper world power. The lower world is represented by, in the sky, it's represented by a constellation, the constellation of Scorpius, which is only seen in the summer months along the edge of, now it's generally to the southwest. The southwest, but only in the summer. But it also has creatures that live under the earth, fish, which are under the sea. There are certain snakes, water snakes, monsters in the water, and so on. Lots of mythology about this. So the lower world, its power is that of chaos, which is also known as entropy. Now, I decided to use the word entropy because you have these two forces in constant, they're not conflict, they're actually sort of in a common balance of harmony, where you have creation, and whatever is created, the process of entropy immediately starts. And entropy is a physics term, and it means whatever is created begins a slow but non-stoppable process of breaking down again into whatever its primary essence is. So everything that's created eventually breaks down. And of course, then creation can happen again with whatever that's made out of. So those are the two forces. So what about the middle world? The middle world, the earth and the physical universe, to them, to the ancient Native Americans, particularly the mound builders, was a mirror, a double three-dimensional mirror. And on that three-dimensional mirror, which is where we live, it reflects the powers of the upper world and the powers of the lower world, where those two appear to be in conflict. Into this mix, where you have entropy and creation constantly revealing themselves in this physical world, which again is a double mirror, just reflecting their powers. We were placed there, human beings, and we were placed there for two reasons. One is we could come to understand these two powers and appreciate these two powers. And our purpose was to maintain the harmony between those two powers on the earth and to live in harmony here. That is why we are here. And that is why they performed the rituals that they did. What they found was that earth could be shaped and manipulated. They could build mounds and earthworks. Let me tell you what earth is all about. Earth is primordial spiritual energy. It is the most primordial spirit. Remember, everything was made of this singularity. And when this singularity blew apart, it created the physical world, and the physical world is made out of spiritual energy. So earth is the most primordial spirit, the most primordial form of spiritual energy. So they found that you could arrange it into circular patterns. You could make other kinds of patterns. It would actually help the movement of spiritual energy. They found that doing it by certain places where there was moving water, they could increase the effects. Water is flowing spiritual energy. They also use rocks. Rock is condensed spiritual energy, solidified spiritual energy. And by putting rock in the earth and by putting it by water, they could manipulate the flow of energy. And then crystals were used by them because crystals are a type of purified and solidified spiritual energy. So that is what that's all about. The shaman learned this. The shaman found that there are certain places on earth where this stuff comes out on its own. It's almost like a spring, like a spring comes out of the earth and this flowing energy starts coming out. And those are window areas, portal areas, and they learned how to manipulate those. So that's kind of a summary of that belief. It's an amazing belief to me.
Yes, and I want to get more into those areas and the possibilities of portals in a minute. But first, do you think how much of a part do you think entheogens and plant medicines and psychedelics had in the role of these rituals?
Okay, so there are several pages in there where I've gone through the research that the Bureau of American Ethnology performed in the Zuni lands in the 1800s. And then in the 1970s, they went in and they found hundreds of plants that they used. Now, the plants they were using were for medicinal purposes. Some were for spiritual purposes. They had narcotics, they had hallucinogens, they had just about, and a lot of those plants were sent to the Smithsonian. The Smithsonian had them chemically analyzed, and a lot of medicines were made out of those, synthesized later. We know that the mound builders in the Southeast had hundreds and hundreds of plants that they used, and they very effectively used, but they kept these things mainly secret from the whites that came in, the Europeans that came in. They kept the real secrets away from them for spiritual reasons. So, okay, your question is, how did they use these in the rituals? And basically that everybody, it leads them to the use of hallucinogenics. And the answer is yes, they use some hallucinogenics in some rituals. Absolutely. I talked to someone about a week ago at length about the use of a number of hallucinogenics, everything from datura to DMT, those. And the question is, okay, when they're using those hallucinogenics and if you witness somebody using them and they saw these beings coming to them, would anybody else see those beings? That's kind of what everybody wants to know. Is this real? Are they really seeing something like coming through some other dimension and then appearing in front of us? And I can't tell you I have an answer to that because I don't think anybody's ever filmed when they've done this. I know it's been filmed by some of the more recent people that have like gone to South America and used ayahuasca. I know that has happened, and I've never seen anything in any of those films where they saw creatures materializing, although the people who took the drug actually saw creatures materialize. But here's the other piece to this. I began this by saying that they would ground themselves, and I talked about the Schumann resonance because that's real important in this. So here's the thing. Today, we live in what I'll call an electromagnetic energy cesspool. In front of me, I have a computer. Actually, I have a computer on each side of me. I have three in this little area, and there's a printer. There's a Wi-Fi router in here. There's telephones, everything. You know, I got a cell phone here. You do too. You've got all this stuff in your room. Yep. You got electricity running through everything. And when I wrote the book, I decided, I even wrote this as I was doing, I'm going to check how many Wi-Fi connections I'm getting here. And I lived in a different house then, and I picked up 21 different Wi-Fi connections. I had a hotel I was picking up. I picked up all my neighbors. I lived in a very dense area on an island in downtown Memphis then. And I was picking up Homeland Security, the FBI, and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, because they lived right in the other side of this harbor, right off the island. They were all right there, a couple hundred yards away. So I picked up their Wi-Fi. You know, FBI was on the Wi-Fi. I never clicked on it. I decided I wouldn't do that.
Yeah.
So, all right. So what does that mean? Well, these cell phones, people think when you make a connection on a cell phone that it's like a beam that goes out. It's not a beam. It's a gigantic bubble. It's a bubble that goes out. Every device you have is a bubble, is creating an electromagnetic bubble. They're all at slightly different frequencies. There are electromagnetic fields that are popping, not just coming out and staying out, but electromagnetic fields coming out from every wire around me. And they're all oscillating and going back and forth 60 times per second here, because we use AC, alternating current. So 60 times a second, it's going back and forth and back and forth. There is a disorder called electromagnetic sensitivity, where some people are very sensitive to electromagnetic fields. And there's a lot of evidence that some people at least, are negatively affected by all this electromagnetic energy around us, which is not natural. It's not natural. We know our brain cells do respond to it some. There has been quite a bit of research on the health effects of it, because they had to do that research in order for all these cell phone companies to buy the frequencies. And the government makes billions and billions of dollars selling the frequencies, mainly for cell phones, like everything. All right. So there is an idea that all of that is creating kind of an electromagnetic cesspool, and we are unable to truly ground ourselves. So in order to do it, what I'd recommend to people to do is to get out somewhere where there really are no you can't pick up any cell phone connections. You can't really read anything other than, you have to turn your phones off or put them in the car. Get away from it and ground yourself. And then you can meditate in the mountaintop or whatever it is you're at. But you have to tune yourself to the Schumann resonance in order to have experiences. So, okay, back to the original thing. So I talked about us responding to electromagnetic frequencies. And I said, what if you had a camera there that was filming when a person said they're watching entities? Well, our eyes, in the rods and cones in our eyes, are like antenna. Most people can't even conceive of how this happens, but the rods and cones in our eyes are literally biological antennas. And what they do is they are picking up small bits of the electromagnetic energy spectrum, 5% of which is visible light. It's kind of right in the middle of the spectrum. If we could pick up the entire EM spectrum, electromagnetic energy spectrum, we wouldn't see anything, because all we would see that we couldn't see any physical objects, because all you would be able to see constantly is light, different kinds of light going back and forth as the waves came through. You would see all the cosmic rays. You would see the entire energy spectrum. You would see everything from cosmic rays to low frequency energy, which is being created all the time. So we're tuned just to the visible light frequency, which allows us to navigate in this physical world. If we didn't do that, we wouldn't be able to navigate the physical world. So under the influence of something like, and I'm not a drug use advocate in any way. In fact, I'm the opposite with this. I think most people should not be doing this with these drugs. So the question might be, do low amounts of some of these substances done in the right way during a ritual where you're trying to tune in to some spiritual entity or force, might that change the frequencies that your rods and cones in your eye, your retina, are picking up, so that you are seeing things that are there that other people cannot see because they're not tuned to those frequencies? The frequencies are very narrow. We know that those things can change, that it can pick up other frequencies. So that is one possibility. By the way, that is not in the book. When we wrote the book, we were given a word count. Don't go over this number of words. Basically, it was 100,000 words is what we were told. So I stuck to, Andrew and I both wrote about 80 to 100,000 words each. And we wound up having to cut huge amounts. So I cut out approximately half of what I wrote. And that was one area where I had written and decided, I need to get rid of that because it's too complicated and very few people would really understand it anyway. And it's not crazy. It probably sounds crazy to people that don't understand how our body is literally a biological antenna. As we move through different areas, we are picking up the radiation or the electromagnetic energy. Some people don't really, it doesn't affect them at all. And for others, they're very sensitive to it. They might have headaches. They might see flashes of light that just might make them feel tired. And that is electromagnetic sensitivity. And again, it's a medical phenomenon, very controversial right now.
Yeah, I want to address what you were saying about the use of psychedelics. One thing that I personally have found fascinating is my own experiences with psychedelic substances. Now, I've had plenty of experience. I've even done presentations about my experiences with psychedelics, and I address the not only the aspects of the mental health and how it can help with depression and drug abuse, but the aspects that you are possibly connecting with other dimensional intelligences or have the ability to. And based on my own personal experiences, not only have I had contact with other dimensional intelligences through the use of psychedelics, but the information that came through has been profound, and I consider to have learned quite a lot from those experiences, and I know I didn't know this information going into the experiences. So I like to address that because I think a lot of mainstream science and academia automatically dismisses any type of contact or any type of spiritual experiences if psychedelics are involved because, they're hallucinating, they're on drugs. Well, no, I believe there's a lot more that is going on with these substances.
I agree with you there. I caution people, the part of the problem here is that we need to be grounded in reality. You can't if you leave your family and run off and start doing hallucinogenics all the time, you're not grounded in reality. Well, there have been people that have written in this field that said that people want to know the secrets of the universe, but they can't balance a checkbook. And that's not my quote. That comes from Brad Steiger, actually. And he said, before all the secrets of the universe are poured into your head, I suggest that you go out and you take care of the things you need to. Take care of your family. Do the things that you need to do. Make sure you've covered all the bases. And then, okay, you can slowly but surely get yourself into whatever those secrets are. But it unbalances a lot of people. That's the problem. You can go way too far. Everybody is not cut out to do that. Everybody's not cut out to do hallucinogenics. There are people that are kind of sitting on the edge of a fence, and that something that they do can push them one way or the other. And this is actually well known in psychology and psychiatry, that there are some people that are pre-psychotic. Not many, but there's a percentage of people that are pre-psychotic. And like one bad experience of LSD throws them into a full psychotic episode. So I don't recommend that anybody does that. I know people do it, so I talk about it. But be cautious. Always be cautious when you do this. Make sure you know what you're getting, and that can be a really difficult thing to do, to be certain what you're getting. Right. So there is another story that I want to tell here that's similar to this. And it's in the book, and it's a story of a Cheyenne arrow priest named, amazing, Lou White Eagle. Lou White Eagle came to Memphis in 1989 to it was a protest. And it was a protest in downtown Memphis at what was then called DeSoto Mounds. It's right where Interstate 55 crosses the Mississippi River from Memphis into Arkansas. And it's a set of Indian mounds that archaeologists were going to dig into. Well, the Native American group didn't like that. Lou White Eagle and his family from Montana actually came here for that protest. He was a shaman. His grandfather was Edward Red Hat, who was the high holy priest of the whole tribe. And Lou was the keeper of the arrows, the arrow priest. During the 30 days that this protest went on, Lou and his family moved in to my wife and I at our house. We had a pretty big house at the time on a lake. They moved in, they lived on the bottom floor. And during those 30 days, he told us quite a bit. In fact, that's where I really got into what the Native Americans actually did during their rituals. But I introduced Lou to some modern things. I had a very small private practice at the time with a psychiatrist and a psychologist. And on a Sunday, I asked Lou if he wanted to go to the office with me. I was going to do some insurance paperwork and told him he could try out this device. So we went there. And what the device was, was then called a gram, spelled like a graham cracker, gram potentializer, named after the guy that invented it. It was essentially, it kind of looked like a yoga bed or a massage bed, flat, and you would lay on it. It was very comfortable, and it created a bubble of electromagnetic energy around you, and it was tuned to the primary Schumann resonance of the earth. So you'd lay on it, and it had a north and a south pole. You could lay on it, put your head at the north pole for certain kinds of experiences, or put your head at the south pole for certain experiences. But it also rotated every 7 seconds, which is tuned to the average wavelength of waves along the shoreline from the ocean. So you'd lay on it, you'd have this electromagnetic bubble around you, and then it would very slowly do this very gentle rotation. So I asked Lou if he wanted to do it. He said, yeah. I laid him on it, turned it on. He put his head in the North Pole. I went to another office, closed the door, and started doing insurance paperwork. About 10 to 15 minutes later, Lou came walking in. Now, Lou was a big guy, 6'4", 6'5", probably weighed 240, 245. And he came in, he was kind of shaking his head. And what he said was the very first words I remember. And he had this almost stereotypical way of speaking. And he went, little blue people. And I said, what? And he went, little blue people all over the room, little blue people. And I went, what are you talking about? So he sat down, and here's the story he told me. He said that he laid down, he closed his eyes, and he became aware of something. And he opened his eyes and looked at this row of windows. There were 3 windows to the outside. And he said that there were these little blue people looking in through the windows. And then he said, suddenly they started coming through like they were just walking through the walls and the windows. And he was surrounded by these little blue people that weren't 4 feet tall. They were like 3 to 3.5 feet tall. They didn't have any discernible clothing on. It was blue, big heads. He said they had very strange heads. And he said that it terrified him. And then they started poking all over his body. And that snapped him out of the paralysis. He had this type of paralysis. He couldn't move until they started poking his body. And he said, and then he stood up and walked into my room and did the little blue people thing. So instantly I said, well, let me go have a look. And I got up and went in. And of course, the machine, he didn't turn the machine off. It's still doing its slow rotation and all that. So I turned the machine off, and I didn't see anything. But Lou was absolutely adamant about it. He told me they were the little people from Native American lore. Now, later, he wouldn't talk about it anymore. But later, he told me that, yeah, they are spiritual beings. They're the most powerful spiritual entities that appear to humans without doing a ritual. And they are tricksters. But if you can get by the trickster aspect of them, you can get some real deep information from them and knowledge. They have a lot of power, but you have to get by the trickster part. So I showed him the cover of Whitley Strieber's book, Communion, which has the gray alien, has that, fantastic alien face on it. And I asked him if that's what it was. And he said, no. He said they were the same size and they were spindly like that. But they looked a little different. And so the conclusion with this, and this is actually what's in the book, is that these creatures, whatever they are, these spiritual entities, whatever they are, which we say what we believe they are, they conform their appearance, their shape, and their behavior to the expectations of the person who is perceiving them. They are interacting with us on an electromagnetic and actually a biological level. And they conform themselves to our expectations, and they conform themselves to our cultural expectations. We have a cultural dominance. Almost everybody today expects these 3.5 little, beings, the grays with the big almond eyes and all that. But some people actually expect to see like praying mantis or grasshopper creatures, so choose your belief carefully here if you're into this.
Yeah, that would also explain why the UFO and contact phenomena has kind of changed in the eyes of the populace and the global consciousness over the past few years, going from little saucers and airships and, like you said, gray aliens to now, ET, mantis beings, tall whites, Nordics, all these other types of, new types of aliens that are popping up into the consciousness, and that would explain that.
Well, and even now, what we have, the culture's gradually shifting here a bit, the expectation. People are now expecting things like the Navy pilots see. So automatically, I think we're starting to see more of the TikTok stuff. We're starting to see more of the little objects that are defying physics. If you go way back in time to the contactees, and even go to the first contactee, which the Origins of the Gods talks about the very first true contactee. And you have to define a contactee in order for me to even talk about who the first one was. But a contactee is a person who claims that a real alien from some other planet somewhere in the universe, could be within our solar system. In fact, it usually is with a contactee, but they came here and they somehow influence human history. So technically, nobody in the Bible, it's like people say, okay, you had them flying chariots. You had you had angels appearing and so on, and those were aliens. Or you go to the Vedic literature and they're aliens, but nowhere in any of that literature does it say that these are creatures from other planets. It doesn't say that, and they're not identifying themselves as such from other planets. And the first one that I know of in history actually was in the 1600s. And that was Emanuel Swedenborg, who is one of the most famous scientists of all time. Swedenborg is actually in the National Cathedral in Uppsala, Sweden. His remains are there. He has this giant crypt there. You can see that. I mean, it's amazing. But Swedenborg was a member of the nobility. He had written loads of books in science, and he was literally a scientist. And he was 58 years old when he was in a pub in England. He was actually in a tavern eating alone. He was on an official trip to England, and a being appeared to him, just physically appeared in front of him. And he was sitting and eating alone, and this being suddenly appeared and said, "Don't eat too much." That was it. That's all he said. And it terrified him. And he ran out, went back to his hotel room that night. We know that the bobbies, the police, were called in because some sort of disturbance happened at his room, and they were worried. I mean, he was such an important man. He was a diplomat, a scientist. They kept a policeman there. And on the next night, he stayed there in his room while he was in bed, right? He laid down, and the moment he laid down in bed, in front of him materialized the same man, and he had this giant purple robe on. And he was engulfed in light, like a big bubble of light, and the man appeared. And then the light went away, and the man sat down and talked to him. And that started 28 years. For the next 28 years, Emanuel Swedenborg had these beings physically appear to him, walk around with him, because he went back to Sweden. He was in England. He went to all these different countries. They took him on rides in craft. He went to Saturn and Venus and Mars and the moon and Jupiter and virtually all of the planets. And he said all of the planets, he said they were all beings like us living in other worlds, and that they had always been here and visited and changed history, that they influenced us. That is the first contactee experience. Later in his life, Swedenborg came to realize that he didn't know what went on, but it had to be spiritual. And he was in a spiritual quest. That's where it all began with him. So I see Swedenborg as having contact with a trickster. And the reason is we know that the moon does not have cities on its surface, just like the earth does. There are not people walking around looking like us. His books on this, he wrote a bunch of books, thousands of pages on this, talking about how they dressed, what their speech was, what their society was. He talked about flying over them and seeing the city and how they traveled and so on. We know that's not true. He was lied to. So now take it to all of the contactees in the late 1940s and the 1950s, when there were lots of contactees. And the contactees would say a flying saucer landed and a being would walk out, and the being would say, "I'm from Venus. You people are about to destroy yourselves." Well, chances are he's not from Venus. So we know a lot of what the contactees were told is not true. So that's how the trickster fits into this. It's like a modern adaptation of the Native American trickster, and there's loads of lore about the trickster in Native American mythology, just like there's loads of lore about the jinn, the Muslim jinn, and the fairies of England. Those are the same thing. Those are tricksters. And again, all of those creatures conform themselves to the cultural expectations.
Yes, it's so interesting, and it also kind of ties into a lot of the New Age and UFO community and the channelers and information we're seeing come out about, secret space program and all this kind of ridiculous, major sci-fi crazy information that we're hearing from some people coming out that wholeheartedly believe they're speaking with someone, and I believe they are, but it could be, like you said, a trickster entity feeding them just bogus information,
And it's not because the tricksters are evil. The tricksters are on the earth, and the tricksters, they're part of this middle world. They flow in and out of our physical reality. But remember, from the Native American concept, it's creation versus entropy all the time. And you have to have a balance between creation and entropy. And one of the things that they said the big difference between the Native American belief system and ours, particularly Native Americans that are in North America, I'm not talking about South America. They call them Native Americans too in South America. We like to say they're indigenous people to try and differentiate it, but they were Native Americans too. But in North America, they chose to harmonize with this force, whatever it is. They did not believe that you could own the land. You could occupy it temporarily. You could use whatever you needed to use on the land. You didn't just kill things indiscriminately. You didn't just use resources for the heck of it. You used only what you needed, but you also prayed to it. You thanked it. If you killed a deer, you prayed to its soul and you thanked it for giving you sustenance. And the big difference between them and us, when the Europeans came in, the Europeans believed you could own land. The purpose of owning land was to keep others off of it, to use it as you see fit, to destroy it if necessary. They also saw animals and other resources, just things to use or use up. They didn't have any concern about trying to keep things clean or pristine, trying to keep the waters clean or whatever. So that's a very big difference. Today, we see that thing, it's like climate. They saw the climate as something to harmonize with. We see it as something to control. We even see it as something you can control today.
Yeah.
And they said, no, you have to harmonize with climate. So just a lot of big differences here in your overall philosophy.
Yes. Now, I want to get into the areas that you write about across the planet that have geomagnetic and gravitational anomalies that our ancestors were drawn to and possibly built temples on and used for rituals, and even may have had the ability to open portals in these locations. I mean, we have places today that we look at that you think of, like Skinwalker Ranch, Uintah Basin, some of these places of high strangeness. That's what makes me think of when I think of like portals and areas of high, probably electromagnetic anomalies. anomalies. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, Andrew went to Skinwalker Ranch, and with the film crew there, they haven't shown any of that yet on the series. I don't know if they will this year or not. Skinwalker Ranch may very well be a portal area where the stuff comes out on its own, appears on its own. That's possible. There are some other possibilities here, but that's beyond the stuff I want to get into. I'm really interested in the Native American area, but obviously in England, why else would you build Stonehenge? Even bigger than Stonehenge, and to be far more impressive, is Avebury. And then you have hundreds and hundreds of these stone circles, not just in the UK or England, but you've got them all over Europe. They're just everywhere there. I spent a couple weeks in Sweden a few years ago traveling around, and they have mound sites exactly as we have here in North America. Mounds all over the place. They have stones sticking in the ground in the shape of gigantic ships, to where you stand on top of a mound and you would see the shape of a huge ship with these huge stones sticking in. In fact, I didn't think I would. I've got a photograph of one here, and maybe I'll pull it out later and show it to you here if I can. All right. So here in the Americas, we have earthworks and mound formations. And probably, what state do you live in, by the way? Can you
I'm
say
in Colorado.
That on the air?
Yeah. I'm in northern Colorado.
All right. Well, you have places in Colorado. There are, and probably in southern Colorado, where some of the ancestral Puebloan people were. The Anasazi. I don't like using the term Anasazi because the Puebloans don't like the word. But you have places there where they grounded themselves. There are some stone towers that you go to the bottom and it's just dirt there, and you ground yourself in them, and you can see through little holes in the side. You can see stars at certain times of the year. But in Eastern America, in the eastern half of the country, you have tens of thousands of mounds and earthworks. And these earthworks are shaped in certain ways. They're almost always by water. They're often near rock formations. There's usually a geomagnetic anomaly in the area, which you can literally test yourself when you go. There's all kinds of devices you can use. The cheapest type of device, I probably have one right here somewhere. I thought I did. Don't see it right now. I don't see it. I must have used it. There are all kinds. Again, there's all kinds of field meters and things you can use, but there's also some gravity anomalies at these sites, and those are the places where people have the experiences. But you literally have to ground yourself at most of the mound sites to do it. You sort of meditate. You have to get yourself in a meditative state, and what that meditative state does, it harmonizes you with the Schumann resonance. That's what it does. When you get it's 7.4 hertz, right at 7.4. It's right at a cusp. In mentally, if you did a encephalograph on you, when you hit 7.4 hertz, you're not asleep and you're not awake. You're really in a nice meditative state. That is the area where you will have experiences. That's the exact frequency where the experiences occur. So if you're in a place where it is a portal area and you're right at that frequency, and that's what some of the rituals are intended to do, you will have experiences. There are other ways to get you and to get crowds into that meditative state, and that is by literally throwing yourself into a frenzy for hours on end. If you danced, you blew whistles, and you danced for 4 or 5 hours in a row, and you are blowing whistles, which is one of the things they did, or you're beating drums for hours on end, you physically exhaust yourself. And at the end of that exhaustion, your whole body starts having a shutdown, and your frequency lowers, and it literally primes you to have these experiences. That's why they engaged in a lot of these giant, very, very large ceremonies that involve music and dancing and drumming and anything repetitive. It's repetitive motions that will do it. Repetitive singing, repetitive dancing, repetitive drumming, anything like that. So you go to these sites. They're actually easy to find. Look up on the internet earthwork sites in America. I can tell you probably the most powerful one around is Newark, Ohio. The Circle and Octagon at Newark, although going in there is not, it's only legal some days of the year. There's also the Great Circle at Newark. Right in the middle, there is of this Great Circle. The Great Circle is the same size as the largest stone circle in the world, which is in Avebury, England. But it's a gigantic circle, has one opening. And when I say it's a circle, it's got an outer wall roughly 8 feet tall. So there's a perfect circle, outer wall, 8 feet tall. Then there's an inner moat, which is 7 feet deep. So there's an inside moat right in the center of this thing. And it encloses 30 acres, by the way. That's how big it is. Right in the very center, there is an effigy mound of an eagle. The eagle is laying on its back, and it's oriented toward the only opening, which the opening goes to the southeast. Long involved story there, but it's to view the rising of the Milky Way during the summer solstice. Anyway, you could go to these places. They're all over in the eastern half of America. They're in almost all states have them. The eastern half, places like New York, they've destroyed almost all of them. New York had a lot of them at one time. I was just reading last night on Ohio's earthworks that there were at one time over 1,000 of these circular formations, earthworks that were in Ohio. Today, there's maybe 50 that still exist, at least partially. There's 4 or 5 that exist completely, but there's about 50 that partially exist. And they're very powerful places. And you could go to a place like Serpent Mound. Serpent Mound in Ohio, southern Ohio. It's the largest serpent effigy that we know of. There's some that argue that they're bigger, but right now Serpent Mound is. Serpent Mound is sitting right on the top of a geomagnetic anomaly, probably from the strike of a meteor tens of millions of years ago, if not hundreds of millions of years ago. So there's a big bowl around it, and then it's like welled up in the center, and Serpent Mound is built right on the top. It's a 1/4 mile long image of an uncoiling snake. Very, very interesting, very powerful place. Lots of people have had experiences there. Technically, it's illegal to go there and try to bring on an experience, but people do it anyway.
Yeah. Now, I want to get your thoughts on you mentioned the Schumann resonance a few times, and over the past few years, I've had some researchers talk about how we're seeing some fluctuations in the Schumann resonance and rising, and along with that, in the past few years, we've seen some not only major events, but changes in people's consciousness, changes in what people are interested in, what they're looking at, spirituality, and we're seeing, ups and downs on both sides of the spectrum. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that, and if you think that this could be leading us to a more spiritual age of humanity where maybe we may even be more accepting of interdimensional contact once again in our lives.
That is a fascinating question. What I will say is that it's leading us one of two ways. Things aren't necessarily getting more spiritual and better right now. I think it's our choice. It could be that it is actually getting us out of balance. And so it would be up to individuals to try to rebalance themselves or harmonize themselves somehow. So remember from this, and I really like the Native American perspective in this, and it is that we are here to maintain balance, and that the universe, as it's configured, constantly has this interplay between things are always being created, new things are always happening, and then things are always being pulled apart by entropy. Entropy is always tearing everything apart. Creation is always putting new things together. And somewhere in this, we're in the middle. We have to harmonize with it. And I could make an argument based upon all the things going on in the world right now that things are not becoming more spiritual. In fact, they're pushing people into more extremes, and things are getting worse. So I think it just depends. But I think we have a choice in this. That was why we were put here. We were creatures, like I said, who could appreciate these two forces of nature, and we were given free will. We have a choice as to what to do with this. Some people may choose to be less spiritual, less harmonious, and more out of balance, more to one side or the other, more to an extreme. And it seems to me, at least from my very limited observation, one person observing the world from my perspective, I see things are becoming less balanced and more extreme. The sides have formed, and it's really extreme. And if you're in the middle, you're attacked by both sides because you're not on my side, you're not on my side. So that's a possibility too. But yes, I think that the change in the resonances, even the change in the Earth's magnetic field, the North Pole and the South Pole, which relates to this too. You know, they talk about the North Pole the North magnetic pull is wobbling all the time, and it's moving dramatically, and they're afraid it's going to shift. I think that has a very real effect on human consciousness. It's subtle in that we don't recognize it. Sometimes we just wake up mad. Sometimes we wake up really, at peace, and we don't really know why. Sometimes little things just tick us off and have us do crazy things. There's like a spate of violence going on everywhere right now. Not just war, but all you got to do is watch the news. And the violence seems to get more violent. So I think it's all possible that we can become more spiritual because of it. But I think it's possible too that we can become less spiritual because of it. But I think we have to make a choice. I think it's up to each of us as an individual to choose.
And it seems that through many people's contact experiences, experiences of our ancestors speaking with other dimensional entities, that there's always usually an underlying theme of spiritual advancement and spiritual evolution in our consciousness. And it seems like for some reason, whatever these entities are, they are connected to us in a large way, and many are trying to guide us in a direction of evolution. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that. I think that initially they're almost like a trickster in that depending upon the individual, it can take them one side or the other. And it has to do with whatever is deep inside of you, whatever's really in there, and whatever you choose to really be in there as to which way you can go. Some people, it makes them very unbalanced in their world, and they kind of fall apart at the seams. And with other people, yes, they become they become transformed. They become better for it, and everybody around them becomes better for their transformation. But again, I think a lot of that is our choice. Those entities, the Native Americans would say, are always there. They're always accessible to us. They're more accessible at some specific times, and in some specific places. But whatever the ultimate force is, it's always accessible to us. But because of day-to-day life, we're not accessing it. We're focused on something else. It's kind of like we're looking in a different direction most of the time. They might be behind me all the time, but I'm not looking behind me, so I don't even know they're there.
Being what we just looking at what we just discussed and its profound connections to human spirituality and our consciousness evolution, do you think that academia will ever acknowledge this aspect of it and possibly change the foundation of the study that they're putting forth about this?
No.
Simple.
I don't think academia will change. One of the things that I wrote recently, I did an update to the book Grand Illusions, which came out in 1994. And what I put in there is the truth. And that is in the field of psychology, which is where I started in all this. In the field of psychology, psychologists are given a wide latitude. I mean, psychologists study all kinds of weird and unusual things. Psychologists have studied UFOs and abductees and people that had spiritual experiences. They've even recreated them in real laboratory settings, recreated UFO abductions in laboratory settings. So psychologists are given a wide latitude. On the other hand, not many other fields have that. Skeptics will attack anybody in the physical sciences who says there's anything other than physical science. Skeptics, people lose their careers when they say they believe there's a spiritual world. If a physicist came out and said it, they would literally be laughed out. I can tell you one right now, Kekau. I can't remember his first name. The astronomer. He's on Ancient Aliens all the time. He's on Shatner's show, but he's a very famous astronomer, kind of in the Carl Sagan mode now. Can't remember his full name.
Michio Kaku.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. Yes. So skeptics are attacking him relentlessly for even appearing on Ancient Aliens and on William Shatner's show just because he's saying astronomy. And they say, oh, you're giving credence to this. No, the man is out. He's giving real astronomical information. And he is saying that, there are things we can't see, which is what the electromagnetic energy spectrum is. It's things we can't see, but it really exists. Just because you can't see something doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. I can't see what's going on in the Ukraine right now, but I'll bet something is, it's going on. So he is being relentlessly attacked right now by mainstream skeptics for just appearing. I mean, it's awful. So no, I don't think that will change. Carl Sagan, when Carl Sagan is considered by some skeptics the father of the ancient astronaut theory. And he has been attacked for that, even though he's dead. Sagan wrote an article in 1963 wherein he said in that article that it is beyond likely that ancient aliens visited, that they did. It has to have happened. And he even gave a statistic and said that they have probably visited 10,000 times or more than 10,000 times the last 1.8 million years. It sounds like a lot of visits, but divide 10,000 by 1.8 million, and you'll see they're not coming very often, even according to Carl Sagan. Yeah. But Sagan was attacked for that. In fact, they kept it secret for years. They wanted to say, oh, that's nonsense. Sagan was careful to say he didn't think the modern UFO phenomenon had anything to do with it. He didn't believe modern UFOs were these aliens coming. And that's another whole story, would take hours to explain that too. But he's been attacked. So no, I do not think in our lifetime anyway, that mainstream science, academia will change in this. And archaeology, we know, has been covering up things for a long, long time. That is for sure. My wife and I were attacked relentlessly by skeptics for simply going into the Bahamas and doing underwater explorations. I think we've talked about that before. And we did it under the guise, the search for Atlantis. And we said repeatedly, we never found anything even remotely tied to Atlantis. But we were attacked for even saying, oh, but you shouldn't even be looking. That's crazy. Yeah. That's absolutely crazy. We found 31 crashed planes, including 3 that disappeared into the Bermuda Triangle. And to tell us that, no, you can't look. You can't look. If you look, you're giving credence to the theory. No, we looked and we didn't find Atlantis. We found a lot else, and it was a lot of fun. And we did it very scientifically. We even went down with the National Geographic several times. They went with us. And they did a couple documentaries on it that were very well made. I don't see anything wrong with that. Yet skeptics say that's wrong. And I tried to get some very well-known mainstream archaeologists to go along just to look at some of the things that we did find, and they wouldn't even go. They said, you can't mention her name. These were friends of mine. Never mention my name in this because I'll never get another grant. I'll never get another academic position. I'll never get a raise. Just being associated with that word will destroy you. And the same thing is true with UFOs. Yeah. Just being associated with it, you can get destroyed. And the UFO field is filled with professionals who were destroyed because they started looking into UFOs and spiritual stuff. Absolutely. So no, I don't think academia will change. I wish it would, but it's not going to.
Yeah, it's a pretty sad state, but what gives me hope is independent researchers like yourself and the information that people are coming out with outside of academia. It's so fascinating, and it makes me have hope for the future of looking into things like this. And I want to thank you, Dr. Gregory, so much for coming on today. That was fantastic. I definitely got to talk to you more in the future. We barely scratched the surface of some of this stuff. Before you go, let the audience know where they can find your book, social media, website, all that good stuff.
The very best thing to do is to just Google my name. But you got to put my full name, Gregory. Put that middle initial. It's L. Gregory L. Little. If you Google Greg Little, you'll find football players on the first several pages. But put my full name in, Gregory L. Little, and you will. Picture will be there. Most of the books, information, even my resume is there with publications. This is the new book with Andrew Collins, Origins of the Gods. The paper version will be available in May. The other versions are available now, and all the other books you can find too. So that's how to find me, websites, whatever else you'll find just by Googling my name.
Perfect. Well, like I said, that was fantastic, and we'll definitely be speaking again in the future.
Excellent. Always a pleasure. Thank you so much, Chris. Take care.
Awesome. And until next time, everyone, have an excellent evening. We'll be talking again tomorrow. See you then.